Yes. Take it on. Good morning, everyone. Good morning and welcome. Hello, welcome. We want to start by saying that this panel has been sponsored by the Latino Services Interest Group. Thank you very much for sponsoring us. We appreciate it. And then we're going to just get right into it because we've got a lot to get through this morning. So first, I want to let you all know that you are in a safe, open, and non-judgmental space, because that's where you have to start when you're discussing diversity and equity and inclusion. Because discussions about diversity can be challenging, they can be uncomfortable. And for some of you here, they can bring up painful memories, some distant and some very recent. So it can be sort of difficult and uncomfortable, because beginning the discussion about diversity and equity and inclusion is the first step to implementing diversity and equity initiatives in your organizations. And these initiatives can challenge people because we have a level of comfort with what's familiar, what we're used to. And starting these discussions are challenging the way things have always been. So I'm going to ask everyone to do something with me. Take a deep breath. Now let it out. Let's do one more. Let it out. Okay, are you ready? Here we go. Oops, I was supposed to go forward. Sorry, we're going to start out with introductions. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Heather Furco. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Those are my preferred pronouns. And I currently am an acting regional administrator with the LA County Library. I've worked in public libraries for over 30 years now. I know you can't tell. I started when I was 3, but I have a lot of experience. I've worked at a lot of different organizations, Torrance, Pasadena, Arcadia. I worked for MCLS, which is now SCLC, and I've worked in lots of different positions, from children's librarian to teen librarian and so on. So that's my introduction, and I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves.
Good morning, my name is Cassandra Stearns, and I'm currently a supervising librarian for the city of Burbank. I've worked in libraries for about 16 years in a variety of public libraries, and thank you.
Hi, I'm Patricia Rivera, and I also work for LA County Library. I've worked in libraries for over 20 years, and I've worked with different systems. Currently, I am a regional administrator in charge of 19 libraries in very diverse communities.
Hello, I'm Christy Samuelson. I work for LA County Library. I'm the Youth Services Special Projects Coordinator. I've been actually with LA County Library for 16 years, my entire library career, and I've held different positions in from children's librarian to collection development, and then now working on special projects. And my preferred pronouns are also she, her, hers.
So, talking about diversity and equity, I said we were going to sort of share some of our own history, because we bring with us our experiences, for the good or for the bad, into these discussions. And so each of us is bringing not necessarily baggage, but just what we've experienced to this time. So myself, as a woman of color growing up in Los Angeles, I'm going to tell a story that involves my father, who grew up in Agua Dulce area. I don't know if anyone's familiar, but it's very rural, and they were the only Black family like anywhere in that area. So this is something that involves himself and myself. I guess it's been 7 years now, I had the opportunity to take a position at the Torrance Public Library, and my boss is here from Torrance, Hillary Thayer, who is our new CLA incoming president. So everybody wave Hillary, she's so embarrassed. Anyway, so I had passed the first round of interviews, and I was getting ready for the next round of interviews. And at the time I was wearing my hair in braids, like little individual braids. And my father's like, oh, you having that second interview, don't go to that interview with those braids in your hair. They will not give you the job. And I had to sort of think about it. You know, he has a very different experience as a black man who worked for LAPD, also worked for the LA Sheriff. He experienced a lot of sort of racism, and he had a lot of bad and negative experiences that he shared with me. And so I'm like, oh no, they're librarians, they're gonna be fine. I mean, you know, I got to the second interview with this hairstyle. I'm just gonna wear this hairstyle. You know, it's not a big deal. He's like, all right, if you don't want to take my good advice. Of course, you know, I got the job. I worked for Torrance for 5 wonderful years, and then I transitioned here to LA County. But that's sort of something how his experience shaped how he perceives things compared to my experiences and how I perceive things. How about who's next? Who wants to share on our panel?
I think I'm next. So my story I'm sharing, a few years ago, I was applying for a job at a library where I was currently working. It was for a promotion. And the panel consisted of current and former library trustees. So during the course of this interview, one of the former trustees said to me, well, I understand you're a single mom. Have you really thought about the long hours that this position would require? And at the time, it was, so I kind of looked around and was like, well, is anybody gonna like say she can't really ask me that? But I hadn't said anything during the course of that interview to say, I mean, she just knew me because I had already worked at that library. So I answered the question. I don't remember what I said. Suffice to say, I didn't get the job, but maybe it was because I'm a single mom or not. I don't know, but it is something that I think about, and I wonder. I was like, I feel like I put in a lot of hours, and so it's trying not to let what obviously might be her biases continue on through my work and make me feel like somehow I'm not putting in enough effort in my job.
My story is just something that I was having a conversation with a group of people, and they were from a different organization, and it was mainly, they had males in leadership positions. And they were talking about that they had been in negotiations with a female, a highly qualified female, and somehow the negotiations didn't pan out. But some of the people in the group were saying, no, but we still need to continue to try to be more diverse in who we hire in these positions, when one of the males says, yes, I'm all for that, but I believe in hiring the most qualified candidate. Which, of course, my own bias automatically thought, is he saying that he wants to hire a man? Which, of course, that could have been my own bias, but I couldn't just let that go. And I said, you know, I agree. I said, but my question to you is, what are you doing to prepare diverse people that you supervise to get them ready for those leadership positions? Because I think that's what we have to ask ourselves. A lot of times it's like I supervise a lot of people, I manage a lot of people, and it's taken me many years, but I'm always trying to be cognizant of who do I share the opportunities with, and we all know we have people we don't always like to supervise, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't offer them the same opportunities and be equitable in those leadership and professional development opportunities. But I just wanted to share that because when he said that, I was like, are you kidding me? I'm like, I'm going to try to be professional and just answer as respectful as I can be.
My story is a little bit about being self-reflective as well on your own, what you bring to the table as well. So I have a colleague who uses the pronouns they, them, their, and I try to be respectful about that, and it takes practice and use to be able to use them, and I have felt myself slip at times, and I immediately try to notice that and correct that myself. But I've also been on committees with that person and other members of the committee using the wrong pronoun, and I also have to reflect of what is my role in that situation as well, especially if my colleague is coming to me mentioning that they have noticed that the other people are using the not the preferred pronoun, and if I have a leadership position in that committee, what is my role and how can I support my colleagues? So that's a different approach to these issues as well.
So when I introduced myself, I talked about my preferred pronouns because I know my own biases, I'm a little uncomfortable with, talking about how I identify myself and how others identify themselves. And that's the honest truth, because it's something newer that I'm learning. And so I'm uncomfortable with it. So I remind myself by saying what my pronouns are and by giving people the opportunity to tell me what they prefer to be, what their preferred pronouns are. So that sort of goes to one of the topics we're talking about today, all of these sort of biases that we bring into the interactions that we have every day with our staff, with our friends, with our family, out in the world when we're just, going to Trader Joe's to pick up, supplies or whatever. So we're going to talk a little bit about biases. And my colleague Cassandra is going to get us started off.
Yes. So implicit bias, basically it's just the term used to describe our unconscious attitudes, associations, preferences, or aversions toward of a person or a social group. So they inform our perceptions, and they may influence our behavior toward those subjects where we have the biases. So they can happen even if consciously we strive to be non-prejudicial or inclusive. So by consciously confronting our biases and trying to do that self-reflection, we can begin to combat them and work towards not allowing that to influence our behavior. So one of the ways, there's the implicit association tests that were several researchers from Harvard, University of Washington, and University of Virginia developed these tests that are designed to measure a person's preference between two pairs of groups. So you can do like gay, straight, light skin, dark skin, old and versus young, and to see how, the strength of your preference on one way or another. So the tests, they're not all they're the be all end all of the judgment of your biases, but it's a starting place. And I think if you take the result you may get there and do some self-reflection, we can begin to work through these. So for example, one of the tests I took was the light skin, dark skin. And the results came out that I had a moderate preference toward light skinned. And on the surface, I don't think it's very surprising. Many people do, mainly from negative stereotypes that persist in media and in our popular culture. But when I kind of reflect more on what experiences I have that might inform this particular bias, when I was growing up, my mom moved us down to Southern California. I was born in San Jose, and she enrolled my brother and I in a daycare center. She was a single mom, and so she needed care for us for before and after work. So this daycare center was predominantly Black. The kids were predominantly Black. I remember at one point somebody had said, "Oh, you and your brother, only white kids here." And we're biracial. We're half Black, half white. So through that, at that daycare center, we were bullied a lot, and we were just had a really hard time. And most of that, the negative experiences I had, came from other Black folks. So I started thinking, well, maybe I do have this kind of bias, and maybe it's those kinds of experiences I had. And then when I got into junior high, I would essentially be sexually harassed by mostly the Black boys who would run around and grab my butt and run off and all that kind of stuff. So upon further reflection, I'm thinking, that could definitely be a bias towards me. And then now it's like, well, what do I do to counter that? How can I not let that influence any decisions I may or may not be making in the future?
So as Cassandra stated, we all have implicit or unconscious biases, and taking the implicit association test can help you. But here's another quick little way that you can also test your assumptions. And this was, there's a TED Talk by Kristen Pressner, and it is in the resources, which kind of talks about this. And the concept behind this activity is that if your assumptions about a particular person or a group of people feel uncomfortable or strange when you apply them to another person or group, it may be an indicative of an implicit bias. So for example, women are emotional. You say, men are emotional. You kind of go, well, then maybe that is an implicit bias to, and so here we have some other examples about it. So on there you have, next to the white male, entrepreneur, politician, president, executive, CEO, right? If that's the image you think of, a white male, flip it and put an African American male or any other group and say, I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. And then next to the African American, you put entertainer, athlete, rapper, chef, minister. So who is who? Some people, and those are implicit biases, we might automatically think that, yeah, those descriptors do belong in the right group. But if you flip it and you call the African American male entrepreneur, politician, president, executive, CEO, if it makes you kind of pause, then that may be indicative of an implicit bias. And so that's a quick and easy way for you to kind of test your assumptions. So we say things and there's nothing wrong. I mean, we all have these implicit biases and there's nothing wrong to have these assumptions. Once we become aware of them, then we can do something to address them. So we recommend that, when you make these assumptions, flip it and associate it with a different individual, different group to kind of test whether is that really an appropriate thing that I should be saying about a certain individual or a group.
And as Patricia was mentioning, that we do all have biases and we do all have multiple identities. We don't necessarily belong with one particular group, but we have to move past these stereotypes and recognize that we are all privileged in different ways. So there can be an instinct to push back against that notion when you call someone privileged, or even if you call yourself privileged, because that would imply that we didn't have to work hard to accomplish where we are, that we didn't earn it somehow. But that's not what privileged means in this context. So those who are in positions of power, especially if that power comes from something that we have no control over, like race, for example, we have to move past shame, guilt, blame, not let any of that affect us, and work to understand how that privilege can manifest in social situations, in political situations, in economic situations, in different spaces. We have to pay attention to the differences and the inequities in these areas that can affect people, and it could be in different aspects. It could be race, gender, education levels, religion, whether or not you have a home, immigration status. All of these different factors can work together in different ways, and some people have privilege in those circumstances and some people don't. And importantly, those who have positions of power and positions of privilege must be willing to take action about these inequities. So the first thing is to notice them, and then second is to take action. So that's how someone can use their privilege to become an ally. But an essential part of being an ally to those with less power than you is to actually recognize and remember that it's not actually about you, it's about the other people. So it's about listening to the lived experiences and perspective of others without judgment or defensiveness. It's about being open to other perspectives and actually thinking about them, even if it makes you uncomfortable or if it reflects poorly on your past thoughts or behavior. And I'll share a recent example from a personal experience. Some of my colleagues and I were discussing a Thanksgiving picture book, One Little, Two Little, Three Little Pilgrims. And so we were talking about whether it was culturally insensitive to Native Americans, and particularly the Wampanoag Nation that's represented. And I remember that I read that book at a story time several years ago, and so my first response was to be defensive and horrified, because if I read it at a story time, that would mean that I was racist or offensive, and that wasn't what I intended. So then maybe that means the book isn't so bad. It's not so bad. It's fine. Like that was my initial response to see how it reflected on me and what that would mean about me. And I had to sort of take a step back and say, okay, It's not about me. It's not about what I did in the past, but to actually listen, to actually think about a different perspective and recognize that sometimes attitudes can change and that we need to be willing at all times to hear new information and then learn from it and change our behaviors going forward. So being an ally is about recognizing that even though topics like implicit bias, like systemic racism, these can make people uncomfortable, and they're hard to address because there are no easy answers. There's no just one way to fix it. It's not immediately solved and over. But ignoring these topics does not make them go away, and not addressing them because we're afraid we might say the wrong thing, that's something that I think that we feel a lot as well. That just means they don't get addressed at all. And that's also not moving us forward or getting us anywhere. And those who are not the target of these inequities, who have the privilege and actually probably benefit from these systems, we owe it to those who don't benefit from the systems to not to pretend that these things don't exist. So being an ally, it's an ongoing process of self-reflection, being open to new ideas, willing to listen to people's lived experiences, a commitment to ongoing education, recognizing that it's not actually about you, and a willingness to take action and take risks. Being an ally is about recognizing your privilege and then being able to use your power to support those who have less institutional power. So we actually have a video that we're going to show you that talks about one experience of being an ally.
My sister, who's half black, half white, but looks white, blue eyes, whiter than most white folks, very white. She and I, we kind of grew up together. We raised our children together. So they're first cousins, and it's a wonderful, very, very multicultural family. So we're going in a Safeway one day, and Kathleen, my sister-in-law, is in front of me, and she's, writing a check for her groceries. Now, my daughter, who at the time was 10 years old, was standing with me, and I was directly behind her, getting ready to get my groceries. So Kathleen comes up, and the checker, who's a strawberry blonde, freckled, very delightful, warm, the checker, this young woman, is talking to Kathleen. Hey, how you doing? This is a nice day today. They're just chatting up, and she says, yes. So Kathy writes her check, and she steps off to the side with her groceries because she's waiting for me. Of course, again, Kathleen looks white, right? So I come up. No conversation. She looks up at me. Absolutely no, just a little chatter. And I write my check. My daughter, however, is 10. Notices immediately the difference in how she responds to me. So I write my check, and she goes, I'm going to need 2 pieces of ID. At which point, my daughter looks at me, and she gets very, very embarrassed, and tears are kind of coming up in her eye, like, Mommy, you're not gonna let her do this. Why is she doing this to us, right? So I'm trying to figure out what I should do, because behind me are 2 elderly white women, right? And I'm thinking, okay, so then I become the angry black woman, right? And they're gonna be, and I'm just trying to second guess all the drama. So then I just give her the 2 pieces of ID. I said, some things you gotta choose your battles, right? And then it gets worse. She pulls out the bad check book, right? So this is the book that shows the people who've written bad checks. So she starts searching for my license in the bad checks, at which point it's just out of control now. Just as I'm standing there trying to decide what to do, and it's really deeply humiliating. Now my daughter is in full-blown emotionally upset, who's 10. My sister-in-law walks back over. And she steps in and she says, excuse me, why are you doing this? And the checker goes, well, what do you mean? She goes, why are you taking her through all of these changes? Why are you doing this? She goes, well, this is our policy. She goes, no, it's not your policy because you didn't do that with me. Oh, well, I know you've been. She goes, no, she's been here for years. I've only lived here for 3 months. And so at this point, the 2 white elderly ladies go, oh, I can't believe what this checker has done with this woman, and it's totally unacceptable. At which point, the manager walks over. So the manager walks over and says, is there a problem here? And then my sister-in-law again responds, she goes, yes, there is a problem here. Here is what happened. So you see, she used her white privilege, and even though Kathleen is half black and half white, she recognizes what that means. And she made the statement. She pointed out the injustice. And she, as a result of that one act, influenced everyone in that space. But what would have happened? I can't know for certain had the black woman said, "This is unfair. Why are you doing this to me?" Would it have had the same impact? But Kathleen knew that she walked through the world differently than I did. And she used her white privilege to educate and make right a situation that was wrong. That's what you can do every single day.
That brings up stuff for me because I was raised by a single mother, and a lot of times we had issues, financial issues. So when we'd go to stores to buy things, we'd like sit there, oh, I hope the card goes through. I hope the card goes through. And now I do that to myself. I know it's like this weird thing from my experience. I have all of this privilege. I am educated. I am a manager. I have all of these opportunities, but that history informs how I go through the world. And even nowadays, when I go to pay for something, that little voice just in my head sort of colors my experience, which is often kind of interesting. But before we sort of get into more discussion, and we're going to have some discussion starters and some scenarios, I'm going to have Patricia sort of talk about setting ground rules, because when you do start having these discussions in your organizations, it's good to sort of set some ground rules before you get into the thick of things.
Okay, thank you. So obviously it's like you're here because obviously that hopefully means you want to have these diversity conversations within your organization. And we know that it helps people feel valued and included when you do that. Understand that there will probably be some roadblocks to having these conversations because we know they're not going to be easy conversations, but these roadblocks or assumptions, attitudes, or experience that can stifle our ability to talk about our differences usually have an underlying motivation such as fear, resistance, maybe emotional fatigue when you're having to explain things to people. Lack of knowledge. I mean, I can admit that for a lot of different things, I don't always know. I don't know. I'm not proficient in all different cultures. So that may be a roadblock. And the roadblocks usually center around three themes. There isn't a problem, right? For example, it's like, we view men and women equally. So why do we need to have a discussion about gender bias? Or we don't see color, only people. Number two, there's no benefit to talking, right? Talking is not going to solve anything, or it's only going to further divide us when we talk about our differences. The third one, there will be negative consequences to my actions, meaning I may say something inappropriate or worse, be viewed as racist or sexist based on what I'm saying. But we need to get past that to be able to have these discussions. And it's good to talk to your staff to try to see, well, how do we set some ground rules? If we're going to have this conversation, how do we make sure that it's a respectful conversation? And some good things to do would be assume positive intent, right? Everything we're going to talk about, what I'm going to say, I'm saying it with a positive intent. And what I'm hearing from you, I take it with that same thing. And we're engaging in dialogue. It's not a debate. It's not a time for us to get defensive about something maybe we've done in the past, as Christy was talking about. Oh no, I read that book. I'm such a, and think that we're bad people. It happens. Demonstrate cultural humility and hold yourself and others accountable to do the same. We don't always know everything about a different group or culture. As I tell people, when people ask about, say, Mexican culture, because I am of Mexican American descent, I'm like fourth generation Texan. I have no clue about Mexican culture, really. I'm the last person you want to talk about that to. Be open, transparent, and willing to admit mistakes. Embrace the power of humble listening. I think it's one of the biggest things is being able to listen and really listen to people. And as we started, when we started this, we're creating a trusting and a safe space to do this. And yes, expect that there will be some discomfort. If you're not uncomfortable, then probably we're not having the right conversations. and commit to having conversations that matter by speaking up to bridge the gender, racial, and ethnic divides. And now Heather will lead us into some discussions.
So we have a scenario here. Of course, you saw the title that, why you cannot say the N-word. I have a whole bunch to unpack about that. From my experience that I bring to this sort of table, my family is very progressive. They're all, they all have advanced degrees, lawyers, and things like that. So for us, that discussion, we don't use the N-word amongst ourselves, where someone who has a very different sort of experience than myself, they may use it, colloquially or in their families, like, hey, you, hey, there. But for me, it's something that I'm like, no, we do not use the N-word. So we have a scenario, because this comes up a lot in the world. You're at your library in the staff lounge, and you hear a colleague with earbuds on, and they're singing along to a song and repeatedly sort of saying the N-word. How do you let them know, like, that's really not okay? That's not okay with you. So we were going to have people come up and read it, but I think we're going to go ahead and have Patricia and Christy, if you could do it. You guys can pick whoever you want to be.
Okay. So I'll be Jane, I guess. Excuse me. Excuse me, John.
Hey Jane, what's up?
John, I want to be sure I wasn't mistaken, but did I just hear you say the N-word?
Oh yeah, I was just rapping along. It's my jam.
Hey, John, I understand that you enjoy the song and that you were just rapping along. That's great. But don't you think that saying the N-word might make people uncomfortable?
I mean, come on, Jane, it's just a song. I mean, the rapper, he says it like 35 times. People are so sensitive.
Actually, it's not about the song. It's about that word and the origins and history behind it. That word is inappropriate in a work setting. It's just inappropriate.
Well, then they shouldn't have that word in the song, like over and over and saying it.
Well, you don't have to listen to the song. That is your choice. However, if you choose to listen to the song, just don't repeat the word. It's just not cool.
Okay, I won't, because I don't want you to narc on me.
Well, I appreciate you not repeating it. Thank you.
So, I mean, I've heard people say it. Like, I'm just like, and I'm like, oh, should I bring it up? Should I say something? That's a way to say it. I don't know that I've actually heard someone say it in a work setting. Maybe not while I was in the room, but perhaps while you're in the room with someone who says it, that's a way to sort of address it. And I get that a lot of people use it, but in a work setting, in many settings, because you don't know how someone is going to respond, it's best to just sort of tell that person, maybe not. You don't have to say it. Maybe just like, it's not cool. So that was one of the scenarios we had. Also, this is something that's actually happened to me. So I'm going to set the scene for this one. You are in a manager's meeting and you're discussing Black History Heritage Month. Your colleague leading the discussion calls on the one Black manager to give their perspective on how best the library should commemorate the month. And you realize this is not the first time that this has happened. How do you step in? How do you act as an ally to that person? Cassandra and Patricia, would you like to read?
Okay, so I'm Miguel, right?
Oh, yes.
Black History Month is American history. I think we all have something to add to this discussion. What do you all think?
Yes, we had a very successful author visit from a renowned Black illustrator at a previous organization. Perhaps we can do something similar here.
Oh, there was more, sorry. Go,
Yeah.
I'll do one. Or we could have a display that highlights Black authors or books with Black protagonists.
Those are both great ideas. We could also invite someone from the African American History Museum to talk about Black artists, or a professor from the college to talk about Black history.
So in that situation, like you see this happening, you have, one Black colleague. And honestly, I've been the only Black manager in many a room. So having someone who's not Black, just like in the video, sort of take the attention off me, because let's be honest, Black culture is not monolithic, and I am not the representation of Black culture. I'm the representation of my experience as a Black woman in my family, in the area that I grew up, going to college, traveling the world. I mean, I had a lot of opportunities that maybe someone else didn't have. That's my privilege. So, if you can step in and not just sort of, they're doing it again, and be an ally to someone who might have been put on the spot, that's your role in helping with, inclusion and helping someone not be uncomfortable and helping to be an ally. So we're getting to we've been doing a lot of stuff. So now we're going to do a little interactive presentation, and we brought candy. So I figured candy is a good way to end the presentation. So this is sort of an exercise, and we don't have enough candy for everybody, but could our helpers sort of just distribute it out as you can? This is from, it's like a social experiment kind of exercise. It's called Lemon Heads and Whoppers. Unfortunately, I didn't buy Whoppers. I bought Cherry Drops. So we're going to sort of go through this process. The purpose of this activity is to begin thinking about your level of interaction with people of different cultures or ethnicities. Additionally, this activity will create a visual image of how often you interact with people of different cultures. So here's a great way. There's candy. You guys are all sort of doing it together, and you each sort of get a container. And so I will ask you questions. The lemon heads represent you, your culture, your background, people who are similar to you. And the cherry drops represent people who are different from yourselves, different cultures, different ethnicities, or if you even want to do like a, different, a different sex or
There's
whatever.
a question.
Oh, do we have a question? No, everybody doesn't get one. Sorry. You keep your cup. If you have the cup, you're the lucky person who gets to do this. But if you're sitting next to someone, they can hold the other cup while you do it. I mean, that's something that can happen. So this is I'm going to start asking you questions. And so this is sort of to help you become aware. Who was the last guest you invited to your house for dinner? Pick either a lemon head or a cherry drop to represent that person. In the other cup.
So
Lemon heads represent people of your culture, your ethnic background. Cherry drops represent people of different cultures and ethnic backgrounds. Okay? We got it? We're the lemon drops. So if I was doing it, I would put in, who was the last person we had to dinner? Oh my gosh, I don't even remember. My husband's here. Have we had anybody to dinner recently?
we don't
It's
cook
been a
it.
long time. Anyway, so we're moving on. Who was the last person you went out with socially? Who is your family doctor? Who is your spiritual leader? Who was your supervisor at your last job or your current job? Who's your supervisor at your current job? Who makes up the majority of the people in your favorite club or local hangout spot? Who is your favorite singer or group? Do you still, is that 10? I can't remember. How about, who makes up the majority of the people that you work with?
First, I'll be that's easy, right?
And one more, who is your favorite actor or actress?
Oh.
Well, depending on how you do it, you could set some ground rules. You could say, you know, people who are the same ethnicity as you, in general, or something like that. Or you could say, you could even do men and women. You could do men, women, and, well, I guess if you need another candy, if you want to do, like, transgender people, you'd need 3 different candies. But I only got 2 candies this time. But it just sort of gives you this visual. Does anyone else want to share? Does anyone have one that's not as even?
Okay.
Hers is all lemon heads. Does anybody else have one that's all lemon heads?
And then the
So, yeah. So, it's just something to just sort of, think about the people that you're surrounding yourselves with. So we're kind of done talking about these different sort of diversity discussions and how to sort of begin them in your organization. But even if these things make you uncomfortable, I want to give you one more resource that's kind of fun. I don't know if anyone's ever seen a diversity ball. So this way, you don't even have to ask anybody any questions. You sort of take the ball out. You remember, like, it's similar to the talking stick. Has anyone ever run a book group where you really need a talking stick? You're like, oh, you can't talk unless you have the talking stick. Diversity ball. And it has different questions like, where do you see prejudice? Or how do people learn biases and stereotypes? Or it talks about a time you shared an unpopular idea, which could be talking about biases and stereotypes. I mean, that kind of a thing. Sorry? I'm going to throw it to somebody, and I want you guys to answer the question.
Yeah, wherever your thumb falls.
Wherever your thumb falls when you catch it.
Ooh! Hurt
somebody.
I'm not trying to hurt anybody. Sorry.
Well, pick one.
You can pick one.
You're repeating the question.
So the question is, when did you first learn about bias or hate in the world? Go Texas. Your brother's Sunday school teacher told him that black people don't go to heaven. Wow. This was in church. You want to throw it to someone else? We'll do one more. And then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you for sharing that.
You know what? Let's close it there. I'm going to just say we have all of our resources. Of course, ALA has a lot of great diversity resources, so that's their website. Our emails are here if you want to contact us. We're all, except for Cassandra, at LA County, so library.lacounty.gov, and then our first initial and our name, or we'll be around. And Cassandra, of course, is at Burbank. And we want to just thank you for coming in and listening to us talk about diversity, inclusion, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.